Welcome to Little Prince Haunted World. Join us on a journey to uncover the secrets of the paranormal world. Titanic, the world's most famous large luxury liner, sank in the North Atlantic on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York on April 15, 1912, after hitting an iceberg. Due to the lack of sufficient lifeboats on board the Titanic, more than 1,500 people lost their lives, and it became the worst maritime disaster in history, causing a sensation around the world. Although we have seen too many stories and movies about the sinking of the Titanic, for many years, a large part of people believe that this incident is related to supernatural events, and there are much real evidence left behind. Let's start the first story with an Egyptian pharaoh's mummy. Many people believe that the main reason for the sinking of the Titanic was due to the mummified body of an Egyptian princess. In ancient Egypt around 1500 CE, there was a princess named Amun-Ra, who was not very famous in Egyptian history. After she passed away more than 3,000 years ago, her body was mummified according to the customs of ancient Egypt and buried in a tomb next to the Nile River. In the late 1990s, 4 young British people came to Egypt. Local smugglers sold them an ancient Egyptian coffin, which contained the mummy of Princess Amun-Ra. After some discussion, the wealthiest among the British people bought the mummy for thousands of pounds. From then on, this princess, who was unknown in ancient Egyptian history, brought a series of bizarre and terrifying misfortunes to many people. The British man who bought the mummy brought it back to the hotel. A few hours later, for no apparent reason, the buyer left the hotel and walked into the nearby desert, disappearing without a trace. The next day, one of his companions was shot in the street in Egypt, seriously injured, and had to have his arm amputated. The remaining 2 people also suffered misfortunes one after another. One person inexplicably went bankrupt after returning home, while the other fell seriously ill and ended up selling matches on the streets of London for a living. The mysterious mummy was eventually transported back to England, but strange things continued to happen along the way. After arriving in England, the wealthy man who bought the mummy was a lover of ancient Egyptian culture. However, misfortune did not end there. Shortly afterwards, 3 of the businessman's family members were seriously injured in a bizarre car accident, and the businessman's mansion was also ransacked by thieves. After this incident, the businessman had no choice but to donate the mummy to the British Museum. The magic power of Princess Amun-Ra had already begun to show signs before entering the British Museum. During the process of transporting the mummy into the museum, the truck carrying it lost control and hit an innocent pedestrian. Then, when 2 workers were carrying the princess's coffin into the museum, the coffin fell and crushed one worker's foot, while the other worker inexplicably died 2 days later in perfect health. However, the real trouble had just begun. The mummy of Princess Amun-Ra was later placed in the Egyptian exhibition hall of the British Museum. During the exhibition, the night watchman reported hearing knocking and crying sounds near her coffin. Even more frighteningly, other artifacts in the exhibition hall also made strange noises. The strange events kept occurring, and even worse, they were accompanied by fatalities. Soon after, a guard died while on duty, frightening other guards into considering resigning collectively. Not long after, a tourist's child died of measles. Due to the continuous strange events, the British Museum finally decided to put the mummy in an underground storage room, believing that if they did not make her public, her curse would stop. However, as it turned out, All of this was in vain, as within a week, another victim had inexplicably lost their life. This time, it was the museum director who had decided to store the mummy in the basement, and he was found dead at his desk. Thus, the cursed mummy had gained great notoriety. A photojournalist from a newspaper had ventured into the basement to take some pictures of the cursed mummy for report. But one of the photos revealed a grotesque and terrifying face. The following day, the journalist was found dead at home, having apparently taken his own life with a gun. However, the reason for his suicide remained unknown. Shortly after, the British Museum gave the mummy to a collector, who promptly sought the help of the most famous witch in Europe at the time, Madame Blavatsky, to exorcise the mummy. After a series of complex exorcism rituals, Madame Blavatsky declared that the mummy contained a large amount of astonishing evil energy, and that it was impossible to exorcise it because the demon would forever reside in it and nobody would be able to do anything about it. Finally, Madame Blavatsky advised the collector to get rid of the mummy as soon as possible. However, at this point, no museum was willing to accept the mummy of Princess Amun-Ra, as in the previous decade, 20 people had suffered misfortune or even lost their lives because of it. The cursed mummy of Princess Amun-Ra had gained a terrible reputation that cast a shadow over everything related to it, including the Titanic archaeologists who had followed it to the bottom of the sea. 1898. American author Morgan Robertson wrote a novel called Futility about a luxurious giant ship called the Titan, which sailed from England to America and was deemed unsinkable. It was the most luxurious passenger line in human maritime history, with all the state-of-the-art facilities and exclusively wealthy passengers. However, during its maiden voyage, it struck an iceberg and tragically sank with numerous passengers lost at sea. Looking at the cover of the book with the ship standing upright, one may think it is a novel adapted from the Titanic disaster, but in fact, it was published in 1898. 14 years later in 1912, the Titanic disaster occurred, and Futility became known as a stunningly accurate prediction novel. In Robertson's novel, every detail of the shipwreck was almost identical to that of the Titanic, with the only difference being the ship's name, which was Titan, while the real ship was named Titanic. In the novel, the Titan was described as the largest waterborne vehicle, also the greatest masterpiece of humanity, comparable to a first-class hotel and, of course, unsinkable. Both ships were owned by the British and were about 800 feet long, and both sank after colliding with an iceberg during a midnight departure in April. Doesn't it make you sleepless at night just thinking about it? The most bizarre thing about the Titan and the Titanic is that they did not have enough lifeboats. The Titan only carried the legally required minimum number of lifeboats, 4 more than the Titanic. Both ships hit the iceberg on the starboard side and immediately began to sink. And the tragedy happened because they collided with an iceberg and did not have enough lifeboats. After the Titanic disaster, Robertson received hundreds of letters from orphans and widows blaming him for the curse in his novel that caused their loved ones to suffer the tragedy. Under immense pressure, Robertson died in a mysterious suicide. On a day in September 24, 1990, several decades after the sinking of the Titanic, a fishing boat was sailing in the North Atlantic Ocean about 360 kilometers southwest of Iceland when the captain, Carl, suddenly spotted a figure on an iceberg. He lifted his binoculars to see the figure more clearly and found a woman making a distress signal. The woman was dressed in old-fashioned clothes. After being rescued, the captain asked her for personal information and the reason for being there. To his surprise, She replied, "I'm a passenger on the Titanic. My name is Winifred Kua, and I'm 29 years old. When the ship sank, I was pushed onto the iceberg by a huge wave. Thanks to your ship, I survived." Her mental state was normal except for the shock of the ship sinking. Blood and hair samples also confirmed that she was indeed around 30 years old. How was this possible? How could there be no signs of aging after disappearing in 1912? Even the model of the Titanic is said to be haunted. A retired American model enthusiast, Moore, spent 9 years building a Titanic model. However, when he took pictures of the completed model, he discovered there were passengers standing by the windows. Moore claimed that he heard strange noises when he finished building the model, and that the nearby door closed by itself. Later, when he printed the photos, he was shocked to see a man and a woman leaning on the window of a lifeboat on the ship's side. The passengers were dressed and looked like they were from 100 years ago. According to a report by the Daily Mail in April 2012, a British couple hoped to sell the house of Titanic Captain Edward John Smith as they could no longer bear the torment of his ghost, especially with the upcoming 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. During the 10 years that the house was rented out, many paranormal events had occurred, leading the couple to want to sell the property. The story begins in 2002. Smith's former residence was purchased by freelance writer Neil and his wife, Louise Bonner, for £35,000. They intended to use the quiet apartment as a place to write. In 1912, Smith went down with his ship, the Titanic, which sank in the North Atlantic. As captain, he had famously ordered women and children first to the lifeboats, which led to Lady Duff Gordon being saved. In gratitude, Lady Duff Gordon requested that her descendants hold a memorial service in the apartment that Smith had once lived in, located in Staffordshire, England, every April 15th, to pray for the souls of those who perished in the disaster, and also as a sign of respect for Smith. Since the Neils moved in, they no longer wanted to accept the worship activities, believing that it would attract some unclean things. So the tradition that had lasted for nearly 90 years was forced to stop. However, strange things began to emerge in the ancient house. One evening, not long after moving in, Neil was working intently on a script when he heard a commotion outside the apartment, including the sound of a whistle and someone shouting help. He assumed that his concentration was simply distracting him and tried to ignore the noises. When he finished writing and went to clean up, he found an old man standing in front of the door, dressed in a naval uniform with a white beard, expressionless, shocked. He was about to ask the man who he was when he suddenly disappeared. Neil was terrified and immediately woke up his wife, telling her what he had just seen. They both exclaimed simultaneously, "Captain Smith!" They were too scared to tell anyone what had happened, and eventually decided to move out. They continued to rent out the property, but strange events continued to occur. The first person to rent this house from Neil was a young man named William, who was a student at nearby university. One night, when William got up to use the bathroom, he saw the ghost of Captain Smith standing at the bedroom door. Although the captain wasn't wearing his uniform, William could still recognize him. Terrified, William immediately turned around and woke up his girlfriend. But by then the captain had mysteriously disappeared. After similar incidents occurred several times, William no longer dared to continue renting this ancient mansion. He chose to move out. The Neil couple tried their best to hide the truth and continued to rent out the mansion. But the haunted phenomenon in the mansion became increasingly bizarre. Soon, 3 merchants who came to Stoke City to do fur business rented the captain's mansion. But soon they also reported seeing some strange things to Neil. A businessman named Thompson said that one day, when the 3 of them were having dinner in the living room, they suddenly felt a chill, just like suddenly hitting an iceberg. Soon, another merchant said that one night, when two colleagues returned late and unfortunately encountered a power outage that day, he was alone and lit candles to take inventory of the goods. Suddenly, a very slight but extremely piercing sound came from the room. The doors and windows were tightly closed, but it seemed like a breeze was blowing. And the candles on the table were also shaking until they went out. He immediately thought of the strange phenomenon that William had mentioned and felt chills all over his body. He believed that there was a ghost in this room, and the three of them resolutely moved out. For the next few years, because of rumors that the mansion was haunted, this room was unable to be rented out. It was not until 2007 that a divorced woman named Windsor Kate from another county was willing to rent this house at a price far below market value. One afternoon, when Kate returned home from work, she was shocked to find that the kitchen was flooded. Bowls and plates were floating all over the house, just like the scene in the restaurant of the Titanic when it sank. She called Neil, the landlord, and asked someone to come and drain the water in the kitchen. She repeatedly checked the drainage pipes, but found that all the pipes and faucets were intact and could not find the cause of the leak. Shortly after this water leakage incident, one day when Windsor Kate returned from work exhausted, she filled the bathtub with hot water and prepared to take a comfortable hot bath. However, as soon as she closed her eyes, she found herself in the scene of the sinking of the Titanic. Many corpses were floating in the vast sea, and some people were struggling in the icy sea, shouting for help. She was alone in a lifeboat, but she didn't remember how she escaped. When other drowning people desperately grabbed her lifeboat and tried to pull her into the cold sea, she suddenly woke up and found that the water in the bathtub had turned icy cold. At first, Neil didn't believe that Smith's ghost was a real existence. However, he accidentally discovered a secret story published by The Sun in early August 1993. On August 9, 1991, a European marine science research team rented a Navy search ship to conduct a survey 387 kilometers southwest of Iceland. They unexpectedly discovered and rescued a 60-year-old man who introduced himself as the captain of the Titanic. It was surprising that his many years of drifting at sea did not make him appear older. Although Captain Smith was already 140 years old, he still looked like a 60-year-old person. Moreover, he insisted that the day he was rescued was April 15, 1912, the day when the Titanic sank. He also advised the rescuers not to save him several times. Since his ship had been sunk by an iceberg, he believed he should perish with it. When the giant ship sank in the end, a wave of air threw him onto the iceberg, and he had to survive with it. In early 2010, a research team led by Richard Wiseman of Hertfordshire University conducted an investigation into the supernatural phenomenon of Captain Smith's old mansion and published the research results in the British Journal of Psychology. Dr. Wiseman said that these haunted places often occur at the point where air currents pass through or where the local magnetic field changes significantly. People who enter these places do feel like they have encountered ghosts. However, the real cause of these phenomena can be traced back to natural laws. They are the brain's interpretation of real phenomena. Another natural phenomenon related to haunting is called infrasound, a low-frequency sound wave. Its vibration sounds like a buzzing noise, causing people to feel uneasy and making flames flicker. In this haunted mansion, a large amount of infrasound was indeed detected. Although scientists have given a scientific explanation for Captain Smith's old mansion, the room that has experienced various haunted events is still difficult to rent out. Over the past 10 years, the Neil couple has also been exhausted by this house. They can no longer tolerate the torment of the ghost of the captain So in early April 2012, the Bonners decided to sell this house at a super low price of £80,000. Is it true that the Titanic sank after colliding with an iceberg? For decades, the real cause of the Titanic's sinking has been the focus of exploration and research by scientists. It is also a baffling mystery of the century. After all, the Titanic was considered the unsinkable ship of the world at the time. In 1985, ocean surveyors finally found the Titanic, which had been sleeping on the bottom of the Atlantic for 73 years. During the survey of the wreckage, they found a large circular hole with a diameter of exactly 90 centimeters on the front and lower right side of the ship. What was baffling was that the edge of this large circular hole was extremely smooth and regular, as if it had been cut with a compass-shaped cutting tool. After comprehensive underwater photography and measurement of the mysterious circular hole on the front and lower right side of the Titanic's hull, U.S. Navy expert Seth Holder and an international team of experts confirmed that the Titanic was pierced by a powerful laser beam and sank after the bottom compartment was flooded. Irregular holes or cracks in the steel plates around the bow of the ship should have been left, but this was not the case. According to the Titanic wreck investigation plan, scientists found 8 mysterious glowing objects of unknown origin and 6 underwater photographs of the ship's hull. Initially, researchers thought that they might be some kind of deep-sea fish group. But after the researchers analyzed these underwater photos in more detail with the help of computers, they found that there were indeed some mysterious artificial glowing objects hovering around the Titanic. Oceanographers confirmed that there was nothing like these mysterious glowing objects in the ocean anymore. They looked like the UFOs that flew in the sky. But they were not the typical flying saucers. They were similar to the energy condensates seen by many witnesses around the world. According to a top-secret file obtained by a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle, Titanic crew members who survived confirmed that when the disaster happened, they were standing on the deck of the Titanic, observing strange ghost water movements in the sea. These hazy ghost fires were like those that ran out of an unidentified ghost ship. The captain of the nearby ship, the Californian, commanded by Stanley Lord, was accused by historians of being guilty of neglecting to save the Titanic. He insisted until his death that he saw ghost lights from an unidentified ship, clearly visible from his vessel at the time. This mysterious phantom ship was located between the Titanic and the Californian. Scientists have come to a shocking conclusion based on this evidence. The Titanic was accidentally hit by a laser beam from an unidentified submerged object USO, causing it to sink. After the Titanic sank, the phantom ship flew away or disappeared into the deep sea. Famous American UFO expert Dr. Crow confirmed that there is no doubt that these unidentified submerged flying objects appear to come from beyond our planet. We have never encountered such monsters on Earth. That's all for today's story. If you enjoyed my channel, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.